Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Neil, for those who haven't met me before. I'm the computer instructor on board. So this afternoon I've got the second of a series of lectures I'll be giving. I've got one tomorrow at 3 o'clock as well on optimizing your computer. This afternoon what we'll be talking about is we'll be talking about ways to protect your computer. So we'll be talking about spyware, viruses, passwords, all that fun stuff. Okay. So we'll be kind of grouping our stuff in about 3 areas. First is communications protection. That's what most people are concerned about. So we'll talk about firewalls, we'll talk about malware, we'll talk about viruses and worms and spyware and spam, all that fun stuff. Second part is information protection, so we'll mainly talk about passwords, privacy as well. And the last part is physical protection. Those I'll kind of touch on because mainly people are concerned about the first topic, communications protection. Okay, so first question is how protected are you? Have you installed the right safeguards? So most people know that they should have antivirus installed on their computers. When people buy new computers these days, there typically is free antivirus on their computer. Typically that free antivirus is actually a trial. If you want to continue being protected, you tend to have to pay for that subscription. Not only having the right software installed, you have to make sure it's configured properly as well. And the last thing is you want to make sure it's up to date. So these days, especially with antivirus, you tend to need to get definition updates. And those definition updates will make sure you're protected against the latest threats. Okay? But we'll get a little more detail on all those areas in a second. Okay, so the very first topic that we're actually going to talk about is we'll talk about firewalls. Okay, firewalls is an interesting subject because a lot of people don't know what they are. And so we'll talk about what they are. But to understand what a firewall is, you kind of have to understand how the internet works. So what the internet is, it's actually just a way to connect computers together and to make them talk and communicate. The people that designed the internet when it was first developed, the computers that were connected were typically computers that were university and government computers, military computers. It was a very trusted type of network. Where there weren't any hackers available. So when they designed the internet, they didn't put a lot of security measures in this, okay? And one thing that they designed the internet, it was very easy for a computer to connect to another computer and to open up a communications network to change data back and forth, okay? And that's the kind of core of how the internet works. You're actually just talking to another computer. So with internet traffic, there tends to be more than one type of traffic. Okay, most people use the internet just for web browsing, but these days people use the internet for more different applications. They might use Skype, they might use remote access, they might use voice over IP, they might use other type of services. And how that traffic gets separated is they use a term called ports. So what a port is, it's just a virtual connection. So you might use one port for Skype, you use another port for web browsing, you might have another port to send email, you might use another port for remote access. So you can see all these different services create a virtual connection called a port. So what a firewall does is a firewall blocks those ports. So when the internet was designed, it was very easy for a computer to connect to another computer. But you see that makes it very vulnerable for hackers or for someone to get control of your computer or to send data from your computer. So what a firewall is, it's actually something added on to the internet which actually will block those ports. So it makes the ports a lot more difficult to access or to open. Okay? So a firewall can be either software or hardware. So you might have heard of software firewalls. But you can also have hardware firewalls as well. So most people, when they have purchase an internet connection from their internet provider, they typically share that internet connection. So what people typically do is they'll buy something like a Wi-Fi router. And what that router will do is it actually shares your internet connection, so you have more than one computer connected to your network. Okay, most people do that. Typically with a router, you will have a hardware firewall built into that router. So one of the features in a router is you have a firewall built in. So what that router will do, it will actually block all these ports that are typically open. Okay, so it prevents unauthorized programs from actually looking at your ports on your computer. The other thing you can do is you can actually get a software firewall. And what a software firewall does, it does the same thing, but it does it through software. But one thing advantage of a software firewall is a software firewall will typically notify you if a program is trying to access the internet. Okay? So you might download some application, and all of a sudden the first thing it does once you run it is it wants to access the internet to do something. Okay? So you can do through a software firewall, you can actually block that access. So you can say this program is not allowed to access the internet. You can configure that. Okay? So the original versions of Windows never had a firewall, and with an update to Windows, some of the service packs provided a Windows firewall. So Microsoft added a firewall feature to Windows later on, which was available in later versions of Windows XP. The problem with software firewalls are very easily defeated by viruses. So if you get a virus on your computer, one thing that virus could do is it could shut off your software firewall, or it could actually open a port through it. And that's even more dangerous because it would do it without your knowledge. If it actually shuts down your firewall, you typically will get a notification. So you suspect that you might have a virus if your firewall is turned off. Okay. So a software firewall tends to be not as safe as a hardware firewall. Okay. So a hardware firewall, it's not difficult for a virus or a program to actually shut down your hardware firewall because it's hardware. Okay. Someone asked me before, is it okay to have both a hardware and software firewall? That's okay. You typically don't want to have more than one software firewall on your computer. Okay. So it's actually okay to have both. Something like the ship's network. The ship's network is actually passing through a data center, and that's actually providing a firewall as well to your laptops when you connect to the ship's network as well. Okay, I'll talk about wireless for a little bit. A lot of people use wireless these days, and they're a little bit concerned about security on a wireless connection. So we talked about wireless connections for a home Wi-Fi network. So if you have a laptop and you want to set up a Wi-Fi network at home, the main thing you want to do with a Wi-Fi network at home is you want to enable encryption. Okay, so you need to read the instructions or the manual for that Wi-Fi router and learn how to enable encryption. And with encryption, you have to basically give it a password, or you're assigning a password to your network. Encryption does two things. The first thing encryption does is that it encrypts the data that's flowing through the wireless network. And by encrypting the data, it makes it very difficult to sniff the data. Okay? If you don't encrypt the data, anyone in the vicinity of your home network can actually can sniff and read that data. Okay? That's the first thing encryption does. The second thing encryption does, it actually prevents anyone from connecting to your network unless they know the password. So the second thing encryption does, it prevents unauthorized users or people that you don't want to connect to your network and use your internet connection. Okay. If you don't encrypt your network, what will happen is, say you live in an apartment building, your neighbors could connect to your Wi-Fi network and actually use all your bandwidth. Okay. The thing with encryption is there's actually two main types of encryption. There's encryption called WPA, and the second form of encryption is called WEP. Someone asked me for what are all these acronyms. I don't understand all these acronyms. You don't really have to understand what they stand for. You can always Google it to find that out. But they're just names to me. Okay. So WEP was the older form of encryption, and it's actually been cracked. Okay. And there was a case in the U.S. where all these big department stores in the U.S. they were hacked into, and they lost credit card information of customers. And what happened in that case, or in that situation, was they were still using WEP encryption on their Wi-Fi networks. So hackers were able to get into there, snoop through their networks, and find credit card information. Okay. So using WEP encryption is actually it's like not having encryption at all. because it has been cracked. So there's actually a stronger form of encryption called WPA. That's what you want to use. You want to use WPA encryption because it hasn't been cracked. Okay? But that's the main thing of protecting your network is using turning on encryption onto your network. If you want more advanced ways of improving the security of your Wi-Fi network, I'm going to mention two things here. The problem with these more advanced methods is it makes it a little bit harder for you to connect to your own network. But I'll just give you the keywords so you can actually Google them if you're interested in. One quick way of making your network a little bit more less likely to be sniffed is to hide what's called the SSID. The SSID is the network name. So when we search for a Wi-Fi network, that's the name that appears. Okay. So on the ship, you'll see a Dawn-Princess. That's the SSID for the ship's network. So you'll configure that on your home network, what you want to call your network. But you also have an option to hide that name. When you hide the name, it's not broadcast. So the only way you can connect to that network is to be able to, if you know the name of it already. Okay. So it becomes a hidden network. It makes it a little more difficult for someone to stumble onto the network and try to connect to it. Okay. Another way you can make your network really secure is enabling an option called MAC filtering. So I'll talk about MAC filtering. What MAC filtering is that every internet device has a unique address. People might have heard of IP addresses, but IP addresses aren't unique. They're kind of temporary addresses based on where you are, and IP addresses aren't unique. They can get reassigned. But one address that is unique is called what's called a MAC address. And a MAC address is unique to every internet device. And what you can do is you can configure on your router which MAC addresses are allowed to connect to your network. Okay? So you can actually type in or enter into your router. You say, I will only allow these devices to connect to my network. Okay? So you can actually have control of who actually is allowed to connect. Okay? That makes it really difficult to connect to your own network as well, but it gives you really good security. So it gets a little bit tricky when you add the more advanced forms of protection. I did MAC filtering on my home network, and I didn't realize, I thought it only applied to the Wi-Fi, but it actually applied to the wired connection as well. So when I tried to plug my friend's laptop into the wired connection, I couldn't get it to connect. And the reason was the MAC filtering was being used both on the Wi-Fi and the wired connection. I didn't realize that. Okay, so you can see how it makes it a little more difficult to connect to your own network if you use the more advanced options. Okay. So we'll talk about wireless security a little bit later on. But next topic, we'll talk about viruses. These days we talk about viruses and we kind of think of any bad software as viruses, but that's actually technically not true. Any bad software these days we classify as malware. Malware is just bad software, software we don't want. A virus is just a form of malware, and these were the first kind of malware that did come out. And the property of a virus is, one, it has to be executed. You have to have the program actually run on your computer. And when it's running on your computer, what it'll do is it'll want to spread. Okay, so a virus wants to spread to other computers. And that's a very distinguishing trait of a virus. Okay, and we'll learn other malware that doesn't do that, but it's still kind of bad software. But these days we kind of classify all bad software as viruses, but that's technically not correct. Okay. How do you get a virus? The main way you get viruses these days is typically from USB thumb drives. Okay. So with the USB thumb drives, what viruses exploit is they exploit a feature in Windows called auto run or autoplay. And what that feature does is when you plug in your USB drive, what will happen is typically maybe a menu might pop up or something like that. Okay, and what it's doing is it's running an application without your permission. Okay, so what a virus will do is they'll exploit that property and it'll replace the auto run file with something malicious. Okay, that will get installed on your computer. And then once your computer is infected, anytime you insert a friend's thumb drive into it's going to infect that drive and it's going to spread. Okay, you can see how that will spread very easily with that auto run, auto play feature.